Hello, and welcome to the DES Pharma podcast, where we decode regulatory shifts, review pharma news, and talk pharma technical operations. I'm your host, Matthew Pontrelli, and today I'm with Mead and Isaac. I'd like to announce that DES Pharma will be attending DCAT Week in March. DCAT is in New York City and is the premier event for the global biopharmaceutical business ecosystem. So today we're going to be focusing on the topics in the presentations that are planned for DCAT and providing DES Pharma's take on these topics. So allow me to introduce Mead Madhaw, who's our process development and CMC lead, and Isaac Jagannathan, our supply chain and procurement lead. Quick disclaimer, this is not regulatory or legal advice. Always consult with your own advisors and engage with the FDA directly for your specific programs. All right, so let's jump in. So DCAT has announced to schedule a few different presentations. We'll be talking about a few in particular. We're not going to be talking about the AI one today. So the first three that I'm going to mention are titled as follows: the biopharma industry, where is it heading? Manufacturing investments, the capacity and financial outlook, a pharma and CDMO view, future-proofing the pharma customer-supplier relationship. And these three topics mostly have been focusing on CDMOs, onshoring, how CDMOs might be handling inventory. So I'm going to start off with my first question, which is, what is the outlook for small cap CDMOs versus large cap CDMOs? And I'm going to leave that one to you, Isaac.
Matt, thank you for that question. I do want to clarify. I think the topic that we're getting at is a little bit more nuanced than just simply small cap and low cap. I think maybe we could rephrase it or even consider high performing versus low performing. I think there could be some interesting conversations with respect to that. And I think what we see here as far as the trend is concerned, we're seeing these lower performing CDMOs are extremely ripe for acquisition. Our partnerships, our mergers, or some change in their financial situation. And what we're seeing is these established high performing players are more than ready to step in. The trend may not even be like a winner and loser type situation, but rather a win-win. I don't think we're seeing so much as an aggressive takeover, but really a partnership. And so that's the way a lot of these things happen is both come to the table and create a valuable proposition for the shareholders at stake. And we saw this. We saw this with Novo Holdings' multi-billion-dollar acquisition of several key assets of Catalent across, I believe, Italy, Belgium, and I think a site in the US as well. Or even more recently, we see Lilly has picked up Orna Therapeutics, again, a multi-billion-dollar acquisition there. Verve Therapeutics, which also I believe was right in the $1 billion market cap. So both win-win situations I could see happening there.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I think that it's important to make that distinction because it doesn't really matter about how much a company really has on the books in terms of capital or whatever their value is, but trying to distinguish between who's going to get eaten and who's going to be the eater is pretty interesting in terms of acquisition. So to give that a little bit more color, I'm going to pose this question to you, Mead, which is how are I'm going to keep it this small and large paradigm, but how are small and large CDMOs dealing with changing inventory management? And to give that a little bit more focus, maybe think about considering, things like consumable lead time, on-hand inventory, and vertical integration, and how CDMOs are dealing with inventory management in those capacities.
Sure. If you think about this in general, there's been a big trend in venture capital investment away from the kind of breakthrough therapies and into the more established kind of modalities, right? And also similarly away from small startups and into mid-size, later phase, basically companies. Then translates into a ripple effect into the CDMO space, right? Because the CDMOs are basically the manufacturing sites for those small and breakout pharmaceutical companies. And due to the nature of the funding environment, that means that basically the small cap CDMOs, don't have the same level of funding that they did previously, right? So basically you have a culling of the small cap pharma, which results in a kind of a downsizing or a contraction in the small cap CDMO market. And how that manifests in the case of the supply chain is basically, you're going to have less manufacturing slots. You're going to have not as much capital on hand to enable, basically forward deployment or forward acquisition of raw materials. The small cap CDMOs never had vertical integration for custom consumables like buffers, right, is one. Media formulation is another. So, because they don't have that vertical integration, they were always relying on outsourced vendors with longer lead times. So that's only getting worse. So I would say that the prospects for the small pharma, small and emerging pharma, as well as the small cap CDMOs are pretty much trending down, or you could view it as a contraction that is probably going to lead to consolidation of that work into fewer of those phase appropriate CDMOs. Examples I would use are, Resilience contracted significantly. That had a multiple $billion valuation that I think they're really scaling back now and they were in that same kind of
No, it's really interesting. That take in terms of the investment that's being removed from small pharma and biotech, isn't getting passed on to these CDMOs, and that's causing a lot of issues for how they inventory manage it, and it's difficult. I thought it was pretty insightful when we were talking about vertical integration, and that really these large CDMOs or with these capabilities at hand, like being able to make their own buffers by getting raw materials from vendors rather than going through a secondary source, supplier that's going to provide their buffers, really streamlines their ability to manufacture, and that just makes things a whole lot faster. So while it's not a great segue, I do want to talk about the other major point that they were making with these DCAT presentations, which is talking a little bit more about geography. So this one's about manufacturing capacity and our geographic shifts in the making, which was another title that they had. So there's been a wave of announced pharmaceutical manufacturing investments in the United States. We talked about this in our last blog post. So it leads me directly to my next question to you, Isaac, which is manufacturing onshoring. Who are the winners and losers here? And here, I'm not just talking about CDMOs, but also large and small pharmaceutical companies as well.
Oh, great question, Matt. And I think in this one there is a very clear delineation as far as winners and losers, and I think the winners are getting a lot of press. They're partnering with the second Trump administration. They're bringing lots of money into the U.S. Lots of money means lots of opportunity for onshoring. And I think there's going to be some favorable outcomes for those companies willing to partner with this current administration in making that level of investment. I mean, we're talking billions and billions of dollars. And I think what's interesting, note, this isn't entirely a new conversation with this administration. We see that during the first administration, there was a lot of talk, there was a lot of hype about big pharma companies having large amounts of money trapped overseas and creating the opportunities for repatriatizing that. There hasn't been so much of a conversation on that as far as I've heard, but I definitely think there's a ripe opportunity now to restart some of those conversations. And I wouldn't be surprised if we started hearing more about that. Regarding the losers, and again, I think it's pretty clear that if you're a CDMO or if you are currently in the U.S. and your corporation is out of China or India, I don't know if that's going to be such a favorable outlook with the current pressures that this administration is putting on.
Just to speak a little bit more about those pressures. So, last time we talked about tariffs causing the onshoring, the most favored nations pricing. But one that we didn't really talk about too much was the Biosecure Act, which was the bill that got passed in December. And, to provide to our audience a little bit more information, so the Biosecure Act prohibits U.S. federal agencies from procuring biotechnology equipment or services from designated biotechnology companies of concerns. These are BCCs. And it restricts federal contractors and grantees from using such equipment targeting firms deemed as national security risks. So this really comes through as the list that the DoD has for companies that are associated with foreign militaries that can't be used to source in the U.S. And then also in terms of creating a list for these BCCs, the bill also defines that not later than 1 year after the date of the enactment of the act, the director of the Office of Management and Budget, the OMB, shall publish a list of the entities that constitute biotechnology companies of concern based on a list suggested entities that shall be provided by the Secretary of Defense in coordination with the Attorney General, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, the Secretary of Commerce, the Director of National Intelligence, the Secretary of Homeland Security, the Secretary of State, and the National Cyber Directory. So, right now, the OMB hasn't come out with a list, but it is very clear that this list, when they come up with it, is going to be backed by everyone. So it's something to take into consideration, and I believe that we've seen a lot of companies start to, or rather the industry start to adjust to this, and it's been very interesting to see how those things have been changing. And I think what you've been saying about losers, that this is just another added pressure that isn't really fully fleshed out. The act is out, but the list isn't. So we'll be updating listeners when the list does come out to inform everybody. But yeah, I wanted to say thank you, everybody, for those insightful takes. If you'd like to hear more from us or discuss about these more, we will be attending DCAT in March, DCAT Week, and you can sign up for meetings with us right now on our website, DS Pharma Consulting, and you can set up a meeting with our Calendly. So if you want to, please do. So thanks, everybody, and I'll see you next time, all right?
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Bye.